Hey everybody, this is Vance Kite, and this is my chapter Adaptation to Climate Change, focusing on North Carolina. My two chapters were from a report that was put out by the North Carolina Interagency Leadership Team. The report is titled Climate Ready North Carolina, Building a Resilient Future. And the two chapters I had laid out the specific climate-related threats to North Carolina and then a framework for supporting collaboration between agencies in addressing those effects. So let's start out with the introduction to the report. The major things that they laid out in that first section of the first chapter was that North Carolina already experiences climate variability. We are in a temperate climate zone. We do see annual variability in temperature, precipitation, drought, snow events, tropical storms, etc. The concern is that because the climate in North Carolina is already highly variable, climate change could amplify the effects of natural variation. So where we already get some drought, climate change could enhance the frequency or intensity of those droughts, for example. And they also emphasize that climate-related impacts are interconnected. So increasing extreme heat events in North Carolina could also have consequences for water supplies and agriculture. Increasing intensity in tropical storms could also impact, flooding and recreation. They spoke at length in the report about how all of these potential impacts from a changing climate are interconnected with one another. So the first part of the report that I looked at laid out 5 specific impacts of climate change on North Carolina. So I'm going to go through those real quick. The first one was more frequent droughts. So as I mentioned already, North Carolina already experiences periodic droughts, and these droughts, when amplified by climate change, could impact agriculture, so losses of pasture land and crops. There could be water shortages, particularly because in the face of a drought, farmers and ranchers will be drawing on water supplies more heavily to irrigate their crops. Reduced electricity generation. This could come in the form of either reduced stream flows, which would impact hydroelectric electricity generation, and higher water temperatures, which reduces the efficiency of cooling in thermoelectric plants. Also, there is lost recreational activity or possibilities. That picture up there is from a drought that occurred between 1998 and 2002. That's Falls Lake. And also increased occurrence and intensity of wildfires. Also, higher temperatures and drought can lead to changing ecosystems, and as ecosystems change, there will be, obviously, species will have to shift along with those ecosystems and may be unable to do so. The second impact that they emphasized, and this is one that we have heard about frequently related to North Carolina, is sea level rise and storm surge. So North Carolina has the 3rd highest land vulnerable to sea level rise in terms of absolute area. The northeastern coastal plain is at particular risk, especially around Albemarle Sound. That picture up at the top shows areas around the sound that are at the highest risk for sea level rise. One of the potential consequences of rising sea levels is that it magnifies the risk from tropical storms. Much of coastal North Carolina is flat and very low-lying, so if water comes inland from a storm surge or rising sea levels, it can travel a long ways inland because the land is not sloped. Some potential risks from rising sea levels include freshwater intrusion. This could be intrusion into water supplies, aquifers, agricultural land, estuaries, freshwater wetlands, you name it, it can be impacted by saltwater intrusion. As I mentioned, altered freshwater wetlands, shoreline erosion, already a big problem and will continue to be a problem. Reduced estuary productivity as the salinity of those estuaries is impacted. Flooded infrastructure and lost archaeological sites. The report said that there are 5,800 archaeological sites along coastal North Carolina that could be lost to either rising sea levels or storm surges, or the combination of the two. The third one was more intense hurricanes. Currently, coastal North Carolina can expect a hurricane once every 4 years, although as we have seen recently, they are coming more frequently than that. The tropical storms are projected to increase in intensity, so not only will they be coming more frequently. They will be more intense when they do come. North Carolina's location sticking out into the Atlantic makes us particularly vulnerable. As I mentioned previously, rising sea levels and storm surge combine to increase the impact of these storms. And as we know, these storms can impact infrastructure, health services, agriculture, tourism, and a variety of other sectors. The fourth one was increased heavy precipitation events. So we are likely to see increased storm frequency and storm duration and storm intensity, which can lead to both flash flooding and long-term flooding. And the consequences that go along with these are myriad. Transmission of waterborne diseases, contaminated water supplies, property and agricultural loss, landslides in the Appalachians, increased stormwater runoff, contamination of natural waterways. So if we have a flood event that picks up a lot of toxins off of streets, that can be carried into waterways, also sediment, fertilizers, etc. Sinkholes, failed water control structures, and a number of other consequences associated with increased heavy precipitation. And then also more extreme heat events. So we're likely to see more frequent events, longer lasting events, and more intense events. The impact is highest or likely to be highest in the Piedmont due to our high population, which is stressing water supplies. The greatest impacts are on poor and vulnerable populations, so the report stressed that the best defense against extreme heat events is access to air conditioning, and there are populations within North Carolina that don't have access to air conditioning. Also, elderly and young populations are particularly susceptible to both heat and extreme heat events, lead to increased ozone levels, which can stress respiratory systems. Some of the projected impacts of this are increased water and energy demands, decreased air quality, as I mentioned, decreased crop yields, aquaculture losses. This surprised me, but we do have aquaculture in North Carolina, and some of that aquaculture depends on cold, clean water, and if we are having extreme heat events, that will lead to higher water temperatures, which will decrease the productivity of aquaculture operations, and also, as I had mentioned previously, shifting ecosystems. So, in response to these projected changes, the North Carolina Interagency Leadership Team formed a working group called the Climate Change Working Group, and they developed a coordinated climate adaptation framework. Essentially, the intent of this framework was to identify collaborative activities that can be accomplished in 2 to 5 years. It wanted to leverage limited resources, and it wanted to integrate adaptive response with ongoing local and regional government initiatives. And one of the major thrust of this was to identify ways that multiple governmental agencies could collaborate with one another to increase the availability of adaptive strategies for addressing these consequences of climate change. So they identified 2 kinds of adaptation strategies. One, overarching cross-sector strategies, and sector-specific adaptive response options. So the overarching strategies, which is what this report focuses on, or my section of this report focuses on, were supposed to be highly practical, highly economical, and coordinated between governmental agencies and local governments and regional governments. And then there were also sector-specific, which were to address the needs of individual sectors and provide a menu of options. Like I said, we're going to be going through the framework for overarching cross-sector strategies, and there are 6 of them. So the first is to promote comprehensive adaptation planning. So the intent of this was to encourage agencies to incorporate climate adaptation, but it's making it explicit that agents, as they are thinking towards both short-term planning and long-term planning, they need to build adaptation and mitigation strategies into their plans so that they are more likely to be carried out. This works on the idea of proactively planning for mitigation rather than being reactive to the consequences of climate change. It advocated for prioritizing no regrets adaptation actions. So basically, these are adaptations that will be good whether the climate changes or not, and establishing an ongoing process that ensures collaborative adaptation planning. So this is kind of codifying that planning for adapting to climate change should be collaborative across agencies going forward into the future. The second component is facilitating communication and education, and this is really about getting information out there about climate change. So it's enabling stakeholders, all stakeholders, to be informed about climate vulnerabilities and the state's efforts. So it is ensuring that all stakeholders know where North Carolina is available and what is the state currently doing to address those vulnerabilities. It is to engage partners for communication, planning, and outreach. So that would be leveraging entities such as the universities or industries in the area to outreach to communities. Also tie local and statewide concerns to specific climate adaptation options. So this is identifying for a community, again, here is the concern for your community. Here are some specific climate adaptation options that will meet the unique needs of your community. And then a little bit different, the third was providing relevant information to decision makers. So this is really focused on drawing on the best knowledge and information available, whether it be from state agencies or national agencies or international agencies, to get decision makers fact-based evidence for the things they are working on to ensure that they are making good decisions. It advocated for the creation of a North Carolina clearinghouse for climate adaptation, which essentially would be a website and repository that would house all of the best climate data, adaptation options, mitigation options, strategies. It's basically supposed to be the one-stop shop for decision makers who are working on these issues. Also, the intent of this section of their framework was to improve understanding of climate-related risks and system vulnerabilities. So communicating to decision makers, here is how you and your area could be impacted by climate change. The fourth component of the framework was broad collaboration and partnership, and this was essentially coordinating collaborations across sectors to reduce duplication and leverage resources, and also to encourage regional partnerships to ensure coordination. So by regional partnerships, that could be regional like the Triad, or it could be the whole southeastern region of the United States. And then facilitate local climate adaptation. So this is really looking at the local level, saying that statewide government agencies should be forming partnerships with local communities to address local needs. And the best way to do this is by providing technical assistance and information to ensure the success of adaptation or mitigation strategies in that area. And really the intent is to build local capacity to develop solutions. So preparing local communities to identify the problems, find the resources they need, and then implement whatever strategies have been identified to meet their mitigation or adaptation needs. And I'm going to say right now that I can't remember whether that's my last slide or not, so there might be one more slide, or I might be done. If I'm done, thank you for listening. If not, I'll see you on the next slide. Aha, last slide. So the last component, and this makes sense, is refine and adapt strategies. So the final component of the framework really emphasized that the state of our knowledge on climate change, on mitigation strategies and adaptation strategies is continually changing as science builds more knowledge. So they advocated using the best possible science now to inform the development of strategies that will be flexible in the future, to continually monitor, evaluate, and adjust programs that have been implemented, and to ensure continued participation of both experts and stakeholders to ensure that the things that are put into place now do not become outdated, that they will be continually updated as science improves. So I am sure I am done this time. Thanks for taking the time to listen to my presentation, and I will see you on the forum.